In January of 2020, there was a big Twitter kerfuffle over an ad placed by a single mom who is also a CEO. She was looking for a household manager, cook, and nanny for her twin 10-year-olds. It begins, "Major responsibilities are keeping the house and its processes well organized, including organizing the house and donating clothes and other items, cooking organic foods that meet our allergy requirements, errands, planning vacations, camps, and after-school activities, and spending time with the kids." The next 1,000 words of the ad includes 6 categories, from managing and leading other household staff members to being highly intelligent, a great cook, athletic, an excellent driver, and having high emotional intelligence. Each of those categories included very specific tasks, including strong swimmer and lifeguard, can swim in the ocean and body surf, can build alliances with other kids' parents and nannies and arrange playdates and joint travel with other families, likes river swimming, can eat duck eggs, can do calisthenics with the kids, and can ski at an intermediate level. I'll include a link to the full text of this ad on the episode's homepage at howshemoms.com. Yes, this job description is intense, but here's the thing, so is managing any family. And I bet many of you hold yourselves to standards and job descriptions that would look equally crazy and intense if we wrote it all down, including details like makes up voices for different vegetables to encourage kids to eat them, successfully negotiates with both a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old, sometimes simultaneously, and be able to wrangle a toddler into a car seat as they arch their back and scream. This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. This isn't just any episode. It's the first of 2 episodes in a strategic level workshop to help you, like the mom in the intro, identify all the work, both visible and invisible, that goes into running your household, and to help you make deliberate choices about distributing that work among family members, both parents and kids. Notice, this is not mom work or dad work. It's definitely not women's work. It's family work. It's people work. The reality of being human is that ultimately most people will need to know how to run a household, even if it's a household of 1. This family work, because it mostly happens inside a home, is often invisible, even to some of the people who live in the house, if they're not the ones doing it. Invisible work isn't a new concept. It was coined in 1987 by sociologist Arlene Daniels to describe the unpaid labor, still done mostly by women, that often goes unseen and unacknowledged as well as unpaid. But even though the term has been around for a bit, I feel like the concept of invisible work has suddenly become very visible and mainstream, especially since the COVID pandemic, so that this idea and its friends, mental load and cognitive labor, are suddenly part of our collective vocabulary. We finally have the words to talk about this hidden part of the work of caring for a home and family. And that is one of the main goals of this workshop, to make invisible work visible. The other main goals are to show kids what they need to learn how to do to take care of themselves when they're an adult, to empower kids to take on more responsibility, to figure out a deliberate plan for sharing family work, to identify the individual strengths and talents of family members, to evaluate your priorities, and to set family and individual goals. I've been refining my own family's approach to family work for many, many years, which means I've thrown away more than my weight in failed chore charts, reward systems, lists of age-appropriate chores, games, job wheels, and sparkly posters. All of these things have their place, of course, and they work for many families. But for me, every chore chart I created flopped within weeks. It took me way too long to realize that the common denominator of each failed chart was me. I'm just not a person who can maintain chore charts. The added work of keeping track of which kid had done which chore outstripped the value of the actual chores the kids were doing. If you are a person who can manage chore charts, awesome! I applaud you. Keep up the good work. If you're like me, I give you permission to give up that battle. As my kids have gotten older, just thinking about all that work I put in, even before doing the actual work, makes me feel exhausted. I was majorly overcomplicating the work that it takes to manage a home and family. I've since realized that the work we do at home ultimately comes down to just 2 categories: taking care of ourselves and taking care of our family. Individual work and family work. Of course, until the individuals can take care of themselves, that falls in the category of family work too, because other members of the family are taking care of those people. So what did I do? I created more charts, but these are entirely different than those sparkly chore tracking charts of yesteryear. The purpose of these charts is to help us visualize all the different kind of work that goes into running a home and family, and to show who is actually doing that work. Not just the obvious things like dishes and laundry, but also the mental load, the cognitive labor. These charts make the invisible work visible. I also wanted to show that every member of the family can and should contribute according to their own unique abilities, or at least they will eventually in the case of, say, tiny babies. So there are 3 charts, 2 about how we take care of ourselves and 1 about how we take care of our families. The first 2 are basically the same format, except one is a self-evaluation and one is a family progress tracker. One allows kids to evaluate how well they manage different categories of responsibility, and the other allows you to consolidate all those evaluations onto one family chart. This gives a big picture of how much the parents still have to manage, from bedtime to shopping to homework to chauffeuring. The third chart shows what it takes to manage an entire family and allows you to share that work among family members. My wonderful graphic designer, Mackenzie Carlisle of Carlisle Creations, has helped turn my original ugly spreadsheets into beautiful charts to go along with this workshop. So for the rest of this episode, we'll be going through the first 2 charts, take care of myself. The next episode, we'll go through the next chart, taking care of our family. To get the most out of this workshop, pause this episode, head over to howshemoms.com, buy the charts, which are on sale in January 2020 for just $12, print them out, and follow along. While you're at it, you'll want to order some 1/4-inch dot stickers from Amazon or from a store that sells office supplies or crafts. The link to buy those stickers is on the description of the course, or you can just look them up. If you don't have the charts in front of you, don't worry. I'll explain what they look like and talk through them in detail. Going through the categories of work will help you get a big picture of what it takes to manage a family with or without the charts, so please stick around. By the way, we also made the charts editable, so you can type your kids' names in if you prefer, and you can also type your own categories into the empty spaces in the charts. I'm also going to talk about how these charts worked for me and for my family and friends who've been kind enough to act as guinea pigs as I've developed it, so you can see how it applies to families with different ages and personalities. So let's talk about the taking care of ourselves charts. The first column of these charts are exactly the same. Down the left side of both charts, I listed 15 categories of work that goes into taking care of ourselves, such as hygiene, sleep, finance, education, and even spirituality. I'll go into each of the categories a little later as I walk you through the charts. Then each of these categories has subcategories. For example, hygiene includes body, teeth, and hair. Sleep includes bedtime and wake-up. Clothing includes getting dressed, doing laundry, and keeping a clothing inventory, buying new clothes when you need them, and getting rid of the ones you outgrow or no longer want. Along the top of the self-evaluation form, I included 3 columns: helper, worker, and manager. This is one of the key premises of this workshop. The basic idea is that kids are going to progress from being helpers to workers to eventually becoming adults who can manage all the categories on their own. So let me tell you what I mean by each of these terms. As soon as babies stop being helpless, they become helpers, as early as the toddler years. Helpers help someone else do a job. They are not in charge. They don't do much of the work, they just assist. The next stage, workers, receive assignments and do the work. They usually have to be reminded and sometimes begged and cajoled to do this work. Managers, on the other hand, take ownership of a job. They create and refine systems and often oversee workers and helpers. They don't need to be reminded to do the job. Using this model, parents, other caregivers, or even older siblings are the managers until the children reach the manager stage themselves. We train the helpers and workers to take over our management job until we eventually work ourselves out of a job. Victory! A little note here, kids don't have to be perfect at something to be managers. I bet there are some categories on this list that you're not so good at yourself, even though you're a manager. In fact, sometimes it's a great idea to hand over control to a kid, especially a teen, who you know is capable but who likes to be waited on or just needs to learn the hard way. For example, I hand over control of personal finances pretty early because I want them to have plenty of time to learn to manage money and make mistakes before they leave home. To give you a better idea of how these 3 levels, helpers, workers, and managers apply, I'm going to jump right into the first category, hygiene. I split it into 3 subcategories, body, teeth, and hair. I used to have to very actively bathe each of my children. They became helpers when they could start rubbing the soap on their bodies and when they stopped screaming as I rinsed their hair. Soon, they became workers, rinsing their own hair and washing their own bodies. When they no longer have to be reminded to shower or when to shower, they become managers. When my kids first did their self-evaluation, I had 2 body hygiene managers and 3 workers. But just last week, another one of my sons came to me and said, "Mom, I am now a shower manager. I've started taking a shower every night." This made me very happy on two levels. One, that I don't have to remind him to shower anymore and keep track of that. And two, that this vocabulary has become so commonplace in our house and that it mattered to him that I update the chart to show he's a manager of one more thing. There's a lot of intrinsic reward in being in charge of yourself. For the other two, ages 9 and 6, I'm still their body hygiene manager. Part of my mental load is keeping track of how many times they've showered, often assisted by the natural alarm system built into my nose, telling me it's been a bit too long. Teeth is much the same. A manager doesn't need to be reminded to brush or floss, and eventually will even make their own dental appointments as adults. I don't require them to take this step of making an appointment to become a manager, but they definitely have to come to the appointments willingly. A hair manager does their own hair each day and recognizes when they need a cut and makes an appointment, which in our house usually means asking me to cut their hair. Just having the words for helpers, workers, and managers has been my sister Haley's favorite part of using this system.
I have a little bit more vocabulary to use with them. Like, oh, this is what it looks like to be a helper. If you were going to be a worker, this is what it would look like. And they go, oh yeah, okay. Just to kind of set up expectations. So it's just very clear what they need to get to become self-sufficient, become a manager on things. And I explained to them that these are all things I don't expect them to be managers really fast. Some things they won't be managers until they're driving. Some things they won't be managers until they're adults. But my goal is to get them to manager on as many things as possible before they are adults and leave the house.
I'll continue going through the list of different categories in a minute, but first, I wanted to give you some ideas on how to use the Take Care of Myself charts. This is going to work differently for different families, as I've seen with the families who've tried it so far, and some kids are going to be more eager to participate than others. I started by printing out self-evaluations for each of my kids, and we all sat at a table and filled them out. I helped my 6-year-old, but the rest filled it out themselves. I explained the categories as we went through. They marked the boxes for whether they were helpers, workers, and managers, and then they each chose 2 or 3 categories that they wanted to work on so they could level up. It was so interesting to watch them do this. They were so proud when they could check a manager box. We talked about how good it feels to be a manager because you know what everyone hates? Being micromanaged. I made sure to tell them that when you're a kid, it's okay and normal not to be a manager of everything. That's why you have people to take care of you. You get to learn to do all these things step by step. When you're an adult, you'll be a manager of all these things. Won't that be so cool? It was really interesting to see how their charts reflected their personalities and not necessarily their ages. There was not always a linear progression among the categories. Different kids were managers of different things. This is one of the reasons I think those age-based chore charts that I've used before never really worked for me. I would get frustrated when my kids weren't capable of some of the things it said they should be helping with at a certain age. I was surprised as we filled out the charts how self-aware they were. No one was really claiming to be a manager when they weren't, and they seemed to enjoy thinking through the different categories. I expected to have to do some arm twisting, but I was very pleasantly surprised. The process of filling out the charts also helped me to see that, especially with my older kids, I have a tendency to focus on the things they aren't managing on their own without realizing how many other things they are managing really well. For example, one of my teens is pretty frustratingly helpless in the kitchen, but he goes to bed at 9 o'clock every night and wakes himself up at the wee hours of 5:30 to go to an early morning religion class. That's amazing. He's also really good at keeping track of his stuff and being tidy. My other teen is manager level of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, cooking for himself and the family, and he's good, but he doesn't even budge when his alarm blasts in the morning. My favorite part was that after we filled out the charts, my 6-year-old just disappeared for a while, and when he resurfaced, he ushered us all down to the basement, which he had cleaned, and announced, "I'm a basement manager." Later that night, I collected those self-evaluations that they filled out, and I grabbed those 1/4-inch dot stickers I told you about earlier. I designated a color for helpers, for workers, and for managers, wrote my kids' names at the top of each column, and then I put stickers on the chart. Now that I'm thinking about it, my kids would probably have enjoyed putting their own stickers on, and it would have been less tedious than me doing all of them. My sister Haley, who you heard from earlier, filled out the charts the opposite way. She filled out the family progress chart first with her own assessment of her kids' progress.
After dinner, it was like we had a little family meeting. So they looked over what I had already filled out for them in the chart and on my master copy. And then we debated. It was kind of like a family debate on where they were. Are they a helper, a worker? or a manager. We had a few disagreements, but for the most part, they were able to kind of self-reflect and say, no, you're right. I don't do that on my own, or I do that, Mom. And they kind of gave me good arguments for, okay, I can see how I should have maybe made you a worker instead of a helper on that. So there was some good healthy debate on what level they are on each of the categories.
And how willing were they to participate?
Oh, they loved it. They loved it. They loved talking about themselves. They love thinking about how good they are at doing things. And of course, there was a little bit of comparison. Well, I don't have as many workers as such and such, and that makes me bad. I'm like, okay, well, now we're going to talk about how in developmentally, you're not supposed to have as many as your older brother or sister,
That is such an important thing to explain, especially if you have high-achieving kids. Here's how my sister-in-law, Angeline Singley, explained the natural progression to her kids.
We said it'd be really weird if you hit manager on all of these things, because then you wouldn't need to live here anymore. So they were like, okay, I don't need to, because they're so used to, like, they're overachievers, right? They're like, get all these awards and do all these things. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's like demanding perfection when you're like 12. It doesn't make sense. So they were good with that.
Back to Haley, I just asked her to tell me how the conversation went overall.
It was all just really good. They loved that one-on-one attention that I gave them as we went through each thing with each kid. And one of my favorite things was I was able to show them my master chart and say, okay, what color do you see the most of? And they said yellow. Well, yellow for me is helpers. And then I said, okay, what do you see the next? And they're like, orange. And those are the workers. And I said, how many greens do you see? And greens are managers. And there were like 7 in the whole chart. And I said, those are the only times when I don't have to put in effort, when I don't have to be thinking about things. So when you say that you guys do everything around the house and I just boss you around, is that really true? And they were able to see that invisible work, which is so helpful.
And you feel like they got it?
Yeah, at least, I mean, I don't know that my 6-year-old really grasped it, but my 8 and 10-year-old really, really got it. They were really proud to be managers of their own gift giving. They felt really proud about that. They're proud that they're managers of their own wake up time. I've never had to wake them up. They're always up really early. So they were happy about that. Rose was my 6-year-old was pretty down on herself because she's the youngest one doing this. I mean, I'm not really doing it with my 3-year-old, but she was really proud that she was a manager of exercise and practice of a skill, and no one else was. And she was really like, I don't know, she just felt really good about herself because she was the one that was getting down on herself. They're all workers and I'm only a helper, but there, she had some wins in there that she was really proud of. So I put it, I 3-hole punched it. I put it in a binder at their level. And the next morning, all of them asked where the binder was so that they could look at what they were going to work on so that they could get up to the next level on the things. And truthfully, the kids have been working on different tasks and they've been a lot more mindful. I don't know that anyone's bumped up a level yet, but they're mindful of it.
It's so interesting how differently this plays out for different personalities. When my sister Cassie showed the charts to her kids, her 7-year-old said, "Can't you just put me down as a helper for everything?" He thought the idea of someone else doing most of the work sounded just great. But my friend Molly's 7-year-old was quite the opposite. Like Haley, she filled out the chart first and then had her kids do the self-evaluation to see how they matched up.
With my 6 kids, it matched up pretty well for my older kids, but my younger kids, it did not match up, and they were mad. They were mad, and I kept on explaining to them, you're little kids. You're not supposed to be a manager yet. You are supposed to be a helper. And they were very mad that I would put them as helpers, literally for anything. They were just mad, especially my 2 boys who are 7 and 9, because they thought that they should be at least workers in everything. and they were mad and they were crying and they were saying, Mom, you haven't even taught us. How are we supposed to be a manager if you've never even shown us how to do laundry? And I was like, that's fair. I was like, I would love to show you how to do laundry. And they were all hyped and mad that I hadn't shown them how to do laundry. And this was my fault they weren't managers because I never taught them. So I'm like, great. I would love for you to take on your laundry. It would be great for you to be a manager. And so we have had a couple laundry lessons since then. And they are doing great. Last night, they put away all their laundry exactly how they're supposed to do it, and they've been doing loads of laundry as they come up.
Perhaps this is the greatest success of these charts so far, even though it was not the most tranquil conversation. Children begging to do their own laundry? Yes, please. Molly and I talked about how it might be more peaceful to go through the self-evaluations one-on-one, but it might be more motivational, if a bit messier, to go through them as a group.
It was interesting doing it in a group setting because I have a 14-year-old boy who is very responsible, very self-motivated, and he was a manager in a lot of areas. He was a manager in more areas than his older sister. And as we were going through it as a group, some of the kids were like, oh, Nate is the manager. And I was like, yeah, we're not going to be mean about that. Like, that's the goal, number one. But I did wonder afterwards if I should have done it individually because maybe that would have been better. But I also kind of thought it was a good, sometimes there's some pressure to improve when it's a group setting. But on the other hand, like, it would take forever to go individually with all of them. So,
Of course, you know your family and individual children best. For example, my sister Cassie's kids freaked out at the sight of the charts, thinking she had a long list of new chores for them to do and wanted nothing to do with them. I suggested to her that she fill out the charts herself first and then present them in a really positive way, picking just one or two things each of her kids already do really well, thanking and praising them in front of the whole family, and then leaving the first meeting at that. Okay, so now that you kind of get the idea of what these charts are all about, let's get into the details and go through these categories we've been talking about one at a time so that you can then guide your kids through the self-evaluation. We've already talked through the hygiene category, so let's move on to sleep. This is a big one. In this category, we have both bedtime and wake up. You can make these categories as inclusive as you want. For my family, a sleep manager decides what time they will go to bed and what time they will wake up. They don't need anyone else to tell them to go to bed or help them to wake up. They determine their own morning and evening rituals. A sleep worker needs someone else to set a bedtime and wake up time to help them establish routines and to help remind them to do their routines. A sleep helper needs someone to walk them through their entire bedtime and wake-up routines. The next one is food. I split it up into two categories, snacks and meals. A manager can get food for themselves, request items they want or put them on the shopping list, understand what a balanced meal or healthy snack entails, and fix a snack or meal for themselves. Part of the responsibility here is remembering to eat. It's certainly part of the mental load for parents, making sure that each of your kids has enough to eat at each meal. It also includes figuring out what they want to eat, not coming to you and saying, Mom, I'm hungry, what can I eat? And then cleaning up after making their own food. However, food managers don't have to be able to cook a meal for the whole family or do the shopping themselves. That goes on the third chart for family responsibilities. This is a good time to remind you that you don't have to let your kids manage some categories if you don't want to. It can be much more efficient to make breakfast and lunch for your whole crew at once and not give them the option of making their own. This is all up to you. This category struck a chord with my nephew, Aiden. Here's his mom, Kelly Archibald, to talk about it.
Oh, this was the funny one, I thought, was every morning I make a sandwich for Aiden to take to school. They eat school lunch, but he's like, it's not enough, Mom. So I just, I make him a sandwich. And so he's not a manager or even a worker for lunch. And he kind of took a lot of resentment from that. He's like, well, but I could. And I said, okay, we'll start doing it. He's like, well, will you change my sticker if I do? And I'm like, yeah, I totally will. And I think the big thing is because his sister is a worker. She can totally do it on her own if when I tell her to do it. And she may even be towards a manager in that respect because she will take charge of it. And so that really irked him, obviously.
Next is fitness. I put both exercise and practice here for kids that are in sports. Being an exercise manager means that you have a plan for regular exercise, however frequently your family decides is important, and then following through with that plan. I always tell my kids that if I had a puppy, I'd walk it every day. Same thing goes for kids. Being a practice manager means knowing when sports practices are, having all your stuff together, and being ready to go on time, and doing any additional training required by that sport, be it soccer, dance, or parkour. Now we come to clothing. There are 3 subcategories here: getting dressed, doing laundry, and keeping track of inventory. Getting dressed is a good one for the little ones. If they can dress themselves, they are a worker. If they can pick out appropriate outfits for specific circumstances, however you choose to define that, they're a manager. Then we have laundry. This is another one that will vary from family to family. In your family, being a laundry manager might just mean that you put dirty clothes in the hamper and put your own clothes away. That's totally great if you prefer to do the family's laundry altogether. In my family, being a laundry manager means you do your own laundry from start to finish. I have one kid who's reached manager status, and his laundry takes up 0 space in my mental load. It's amazing. The third category is inventory. This includes the dreaded seasonal transitions and storing hand-me-downs. All of my kids are workers and helpers here, except for my oldest, who's a manager, mostly because he doesn't have any hand-me-downs to sort through. But it also involves knowing what you have, knowing what you need or want to buy, making that happen, and giving away what you no longer want or need. Next is stuff, by which I mean any personal possessions other than clothes. So toys, school papers, trinkets, collections, the rocks in their pockets, etc. The 2 subcategories here are picking up their stuff and organizing it, basically the 2 arms of the saying, a place for everything and everything in its place. I put these as 2 separate categories because they're quite different skills that we can teach our kids. How to not just litter our stuff around the house, and how to set up systems to organize our stuff, including knowing when to throw things away or donate. Here's Molly again to talk about that category.
It's my 16-year-old, I thought it was especially interesting because she was pretty honest on there. And she is a very messy, unorganized person. So when we got to the caring for your things and organization, when we went through it, she was like, oh, yeah, I put myself as a helper for sure. And I was like, well, good, because I also put you as a helper.
The next category is cleaning. On this chart, it just applies to cleaning up after themselves, not family chores. So things like their own bedroom, bathroom, and any messes they make with toys or crafts, or if they spill Cheerios all over the floor. In situations where they share, like the 3 boys that share one of our bathrooms, they all have defined responsibilities within the bathroom. Next is finance, which could obviously be its own episode. In fact, I have a couple of different episodes about kids and money, episodes 4 and 5, and I have another one specifically for teens in the works. I included 4 categories here because they're all quite different skills. I put spending and budgeting together, then saving, giving, and banking. For the next category, education, I divided it into homework, study, and explore. An education manager doesn't even need me to check their school portal to see if they have missing assignments. They can and should ask for help when they need help with homework, especially for editing papers and studying for tests. But they are the ones who identify how to do well in their classes and do what they need to do. I put the explore category in there to foster curiosity. Preschoolers can be the most competent managers in this category, and that can be one of the places where they actually get to place that sticker. They learn by exploring, and they ask why all the time. This is one of the only categories where it's common to regress as kids get older. The next category is social. This includes planning and hosting their own hangouts, activities, and parties, except their own birthday parties, of course, nurturing relationships both inside and outside of the family, and serving others. Basically, if you have to make playdates or organize activities for your kids, they're workers. If you also have to come up with things for them to do or closely supervise those playdates, they're helpers. This is a chance to really evaluate whether your kids feel responsible for connecting with siblings and friends and have the skills to do so. You can absolutely teach things like how to be a good conversationalist and to remember important events or facts about their friends. This is such an interesting category because it's kind of changed from when we were kids. Here's what Angeline had to say about that.
I would love to have a social manager because I'm like everyone's agent. These kids are like celebrities, and I'm like planning on when they're going to meet so-and-so and when they're going to do this. And I'm like, my goodness, you have thriving social lives, and it's weird. It's very weird. Not very, very not how I grew up too. We just didn't have a social life. Your social life was you go to school and you talk to your friends there.
Next is scheduling appointments, managing a calendar, and being on time for things. We recently made separate digital calendars for our 3 oldest boys that they manage but share with us on our master calendars. We can also add events to their calendars. It's a great way to train them to maintain their own schedules. Then we have talents. We already covered athletic talents under fitness, but this category can cover any other type of talent from art to music to leadership. I divided it into 2 categories, practicing and sharing. Sharing talents can be performing, entering competitions, displaying art, etc. But I wanted to make sure it's clear that sharing our talents is an important part of developing our talents because it both helps us grow and benefits others. Next is transportation. 2 subcategories here, getting where you need to go and maintaining vehicles. So far, the only vehicles of my kids own are bikes, but that's a great way to teach maintenance. A couple of my kids can change a tube, and they know how to clean and lube their bikes. Getting where you need to go can mean asking for rides and just making sure you communicate well about after-school activities. Then there's technology. Being safe online, managing screen time, and understanding how to use their devices and maintaining them. This is another category for which you may not want your kids to be complete managers until they leave home, meaning you have some filters and restrictions in place for your kids because, as my sister facetiously mentioned in our focus group, they're teenagers. What could possibly go wrong? The final category is spirituality. This may or may not be important to you and your family, which is totally fine, but you don't have to be part of an organized religion to cultivate the spiritual side of your kids. The categories here are mostly about teaching them to think deeply about their values and figure out what they believe. Things like studying, praying, and meditating, and pondering or journaling. Before this year, I had never really thought of pondering as a skill to develop, but the children's leader at our church challenged the kids to ponder for 3 minutes a day, and we tried it, and it's been amazing to take some time to be quiet and think together and then talk about what we pondered. Teaching our kids the skill of wondering and thinking deeply is a really interesting way to teach them to be self-sufficient. Phew, we made it through the whole list. Once you've gone through the list with your family and you've put all the stickers on the family progress tracker, there are a few more steps you can take. You may have noticed that there are a lot of helper and worker stickers on your chart. Obviously, when they aren't managers, someone has to be the manager. That's what that little manager column is for. This is where you can have a conversation with your spouse, partner, or whoever else helps you take care of your kids and figure out who manages each category and subcategory. Then you can show this to your kids and have them look at the big picture of the work of taking care of all the little people in your house. Here's Angeline again, talking about how this part of the conversation went for her family. To put it into perspective, Angeline just had her 7th baby.
Brett started out talking about like mental load, and they were like, okay, I kind of get it. But then after we did the whole thing, whenever Brett was like, okay, who's the manager of this? And everyone said, mom, 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 mom. And it was like that, except for like hanging Christmas lights and changing the car's oil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they were like kind of shocked. So that was kind of nice. But some of them were like very surprised. And they were like, I see what you mean by mental load, because it's not till you write it down that they were like, oh, that's a thing. They were like, oh, that's why you're so busy all the time and that you don't want to play with us. And I'm like, it's not that I don't want to play with you. I can't right now. Like, I can't for the next 5 years unless you guys help me out. And so I think that they were shocked and realized like why I was so busy all the time.
My sister-in-law, Kelly Archibald, pulled the charts out earlier than she had planned in a moment of frustration.
Admittedly, when I showed them this, I was kind of frustrated. And because I was like making dinner, doing the dishes, making sure the floor swept, everything's put away. And anyway, I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm going to show them what I like, all this stuff I'm doing. Anyway, so that was it wasn't probably in the best manner. But as soon as we sat down and I showed them this, they all they gathered around me and they were really interested. They were very excited about this. So especially Aiden, he really, really thrives with order and really does not do well with any kind of chaos. And so he loved it because he was just saying, Mom, we need to have like better chores so it's not like we're cleaning all the time. Anyway, it was a whole thing.
Kelly had already filled out the family progress charts so she could show them the bird's eye view.
I said, okay, now look at all the yellow. That's basically me doing everything. And then orange is my worker. And I still have to think about those things. I still have to make sure that they get done, that kind of thing. But if anytime you have a green there, that's something that I don't have to really worry about. And so we can do, more things if I'm not having to do everything. So anyway,
Awesome.
It's good. Hopefully the gratitude goes up all around. Because even for me looking at this, I can be like, oh, well, look, Aiden's really working hard on becoming a manager at this, that's something that is off my load and I need to be more grateful for him, that kind of thing.
Another great step you can take with your kids is using the charts to set goals.
The overall ending for us was that we sat down and made goals for every single child based on a category they wanted to work on. And for my little boys who were very bothered by being helpers and not workers or managers, they set 3 goals of doing laundry, of being managers and waking themselves up, and being managers on their teeth. And so even though my big kids, I don't have to manage them as much. They were not as motivated, but my little boys were super motivated, and everyone in my family set new goals.
Awesome. And how have those been going?
So for the big kids, maybe not as measurable because some of them were like goals in school. But my little boys have been doing a great job. And Emmy has actually been doing a great job. So one of my middle daughters has been doing a great job in keeping her room clean. That was her new thing, is that she wanted to be more organized in her room. So I told my kids we would revisit it in 6 months and see how everybody goes. And that I'll buy lots of green stickers because we used green stickers for managers and everybody wants to be a manager. Except for my teenager who doesn't care.
One of the interesting things about going through these charts is finding gaps in what you've taught your kids. Sometimes I remembered to teach the older kids things and totally forgot to teach the youngers. And sometimes I didn't even think about teaching my older kids things that the younger kids just naturally picked up from watching their siblings. Kelly found this to be true too.
And it was a lot of that stuff like, well, you haven't taught me how to do this. Well, you haven't, and it's like, you're right. And that's where let's work on that, Let's work together to get you to manager in a lot of these areas,
Once you realize where your gaps are, you could even hold training sessions or clinics to teach skills, or better yet, have older kids teach skills to the younger ones. And now for the bonus round. How about printing off your own self-evaluation? You're an adult, so I'm assuming you're the manager of everything on that list. But I'm guessing you, like me, are not very good at some of the categories. So you can use this as a self-care report card instead, and even give yourself a letter grade. Have you been getting enough sleep? My guess is no. Do you feed the kids and forget to feed yourself, or do you take time to eat healthy food that makes you feel your best? How about exercise, taking time for your spiritual needs? Now I realize you may be in survival mode like Angeline, with a brand new baby and several other kids to care for, and this list may be laughable. But I challenge you to find at least one area where you can level up. You could even prioritize the categories based on what's most important to you. You could divide them into wants and needs to determine which categories are non-negotiable to your self-care, even when you're still in survival mode, and which ones are less important to you or might have to wait for later. I'm sure many of you will think of other great ways to use these charts, and I'd love to hear how they work for your families and the unique ways you use them. You can always email me at whitney@howshemoms.com or join our Facebook group. I'll be starting a discussion about this workshop in the group this week, and we'd love for you to join in. And of course, stay tuned for next week when we'll talk about the other chart, how we take care of our families. Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms, and we also have a Facebook group that you can join, which is the main place for more philosophical discussions about the ideas I'll be discussing on future episodes of the podcast. It's also one of the best ways for you to contribute to future episodes. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. I have big plans for revamping my site this fall, so stay tuned for that. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.